Beginning the news with Central Asia, northern Afghanistan roadside explosion kills 7. North Korea's orders new artillery firings over South drills. Ukrainians face emergency blackouts after Russian missile raids. China bids farewell to former leader, and Amnesty International Canada target of China-linked cyber attack. This and more stories coming your way. According to local officials, no less than 7 people have been killed in a roadside blast in northern Afghanistan, the newest attack in the violence-wrecked country. Those killed in the 7 a.m. blast on Tuesday in the city of Mazar-e-Sharif included employees of a petroleum company on a bus, said the local officials. The northern Balkh province contains one of the country's major dry ports at the town of Hayratan, close to the border with Uzbekistan, containing rail and road connected to Central Asia. It was not instantly clear who was behind the attack, which comes amidst recurring pledges from the Taliban government to bring security to Afghanistan following decades of war. The Taliban government swept to power in August last year amidst an extraction by United States-led foreign forces who had invaded the country and ousted the group from power in 2011. Last month, at least 19 people were killed and 24 others wounded by a blast at a school in Aybak, a city in Samangan province that borders Balkh province. At least 9 people died in a sequence of explosion in Mazar-e-Sharif in May, while 2 others were killed in a simultaneous attack at a mosque in the capital, Kabul. ISIS, the Taliban's main rival in Afghanistan, had claimed responsibility for the attack in Mazar-e-Sharif, but not for the Kabul blast. Recent violence has also involved a suicide bombing that killed 4 at a mosque at Afghanistan Interior Ministry building complex in October. North Korea's military has ordered frontline units to fire artillery into the sea for a second consecutive day in what it called a reaction to exercises by the United States and South Korean forces in an inland border region. The order on Tuesday came a day after North Korea fired about 130 artillery rounds into waters near its western and eastern sea boundaries with South Korea. A spokesman for the North Korean military said the newest planned artillery barrage was meant as a strong warning to show and was in response to signs of South Korean artillery drills in the border region. The official called on Seoul to quickly stop its provocative military actions. The South Korean and United States militaries are presently conducting live-fire exercises involving multiple rocket launching systems and mortars in 2 separate testing grounds in the Cheolwon region, which started on Monday and will continue until Wednesday. The allies say the trainings are essential to prevent nuclear-armed North Korea, which tested a record number of missiles this year and has made preparations to recommence nuclear testing for the first time since 2017. On the day the exercises began, North Korea's military said it detected dozens of South Korean projectiles flying southeast from the Cheolwon region and instructed its western and eastern coastal units to fire artillery as a warning. South Korea's Joint Chiefs of Staff said those shells that North Korea fired fell within the northern side of the buffer zones created under a 2018 inter-Korean agreement to reduce military tensions and urged Pyongyang to abide by the agreement. It was the first time North Korea had fired weapons into the maritime buffer zone since November 3rd, when about 80 artillery shells landed within the North Korean side of the zone off its eastern coast. Experts say North Korea hopes to negotiate economic and security consensus from a position of strength and force the U.S. to accept it as a nuclear power. On Russia-Ukraine war, Ukraine has warned of more emergency blackouts, mostly in the Kyiv region, after a wave of Russian missile attacks damaged energy infrastructure that had only just been repaired. The barrage of missiles, which plunged parts of Ukraine back into freezing darkness with temperatures below 0 degrees Celsius, that's 32 degrees Fahrenheit, was the newest in weeks of raids hitting critical infrastructure. Late on Monday, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said in a video address at least 4 people were killed, adding that most of the estimated 70 missiles had been shot down. The national electricity provider, Ukrenergo, said there will be renewed power cuts in all regions of Ukraine due to the consequences of shelling. About half of the Kyiv region, which does not include the capital and had a population of about 1.8 million people before the war, will be without electricity in the coming days, the region's governor said. The attack caused damage to power plants in the regions of Kyiv and Vinnytsia in central Ukraine, Odessa in the south, and Sumy in the north, officials said. Closely half of Ukraine's energy system has already been destroyed after months of raids on power infrastructure, leaving people in the cold and dark for hours at a time. The country had only just returned on Monday to scheduled power outages rather than the emergency blackouts it has suffered since November 23rd, the most intense day of Russian attacks on energy infrastructure. Ukraine says such attacks are targeted at civilians and constitute war crimes. Moscow denies aiming civilians. The United States said it will summon a virtual meeting on Thursday with oil and gas executives to deliberate how it can support Ukrainian energy infrastructure, according to reports. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said Russia will fail in its current strategy of trying to, in effect, get the Ukrainian people to throw up their hand. Now, China has bid farewell to Jiang Zemin with sirens blaring out in tribute as people across the country observed 3-minute silence for the former president. The public memorial service for Jiang, who died last week at the age of 96, started at 10 a.m. local time on Tuesday in Beijing's Great Hall of the People, with President Xi Jinping and other top leaders attending. He leaves a controversial legacy, having led China out of isolation after the army crushed student-led pro-democracy protests centered on Beijing's Tiananmen Square in 1989, while at the same time supporting economic reforms that led to a decade of explosive growth. A trained engineer and former head of China's largest city, Shanghai, Jiang was president for a decade until 2003 and led the ruling Communist Party for 13 years until 2002. After taking over from reformist leader Deng Xiaoping, he oversaw the return of Hong Kong from British rule in 1997 and Beijing's entry into the World Trade Organization in 2001. Speaking at Tuesday's somber memorial service, Chinese leader Xi Jinping paid tribute to Jiang for ensuring the Communist Party's survival from political slums, saying the late leader had assumed leadership at a time when the party, military and country were at a serious moment of external pressure and internal difficulties, a reference to the Tiananmen Square protests. The ex-leader, who had firm beliefs and was decisive, upheld China's independence, dignity, security and stability, Xi said. He had the extraordinary courage to make bold decisions and the great courage to carry out theoretical innovation at critical moments, he added. The Canadian Office of Human Rights group Amnesty International says its English language unit was the target of a sophisticated hacking attempt that it believes is connected to China. The digital security breach was first detected on October 5th when suspicious activity was spotted on Amnesty's IT infrastructure, Amnesty International Canada said in a statement on Monday. It took abrupt action to protect the systems and investigate the source of the attack, it added. The preliminary results of the investigations showed the breach was perpetrated using tools and techniques associated with specific advanced persistent threat groups, APTs, Amnesty said. Forensic experts with international cybersecurity firm SecureWorks later established that a threat group sponsored or tasked by the Chinese state was possibly behind the attack. The forensic audit's conclusion is based on the nature of the targeted information, as well as the observed tools and behaviors, which are consistent with those associated with Chinese cyber espionage threat groups, it added. A report released in August by cybersecurity firm Recorded Future said a hacking group known as Red Alpha, suspected of acting on behalf of the Chinese government, had conducted a years-long espionage campaign against numerous governments, think tanks, news agencies, and non-governmental organizations, NGOs, including Amnesty. Last year, the United States, United Kingdom, and their allies accused actors affiliated with the Chinese government of a cyber attack on Microsoft's Exchange and blamed the Chinese government for a broad array of malicious cyber activities. Amnesty said it had decided to speak publicly about the attack as a warning to other human rights defenders on the increasing threat of digital security breaches to their work. The body said no evidence had been found that any donor or membership data had been taken. More stories on economy. China's Beijing reduces COVID curves after rare protests. Beijing, China's capital, is no longer needing a negative COVID-19 test to enter supermarkets and commercial buildings. Local authorities have said in the freshest relaxation of the country's tough zero-COVID policy following rare protests. Residents must still provide a negative test result to enter all the venues, including schools, bars, karaoke lounges, internet cafes, indoor gyms, and nursing homes. The loosening of restrictions comes after at least a dozen cities across China have reduced COVID-19 curves in recent days following the biggest display of civil disobedience in decades last month. The protests, which spread to over 20 Chinese cities, started on November 25th, amidst claims that COVID curves in far western Xinjiang had added to the death toll of an apartment building fire that killed at least 10 people. Authorities denied that lockdowns had trapped the victims or hindered rescue efforts. Shanghai, China's largest city, on Sunday became the latest metropolis to scrap tests for public transport and outdoor areas such as parks and tourist attractions, following similar moves by Beijing, Shenzhen, Chengdu, and Tianjin. While Beijing has moved to ease some restrictions and portray newer coronavirus variants as less severe, it has yet to signal when the country may fully reopen and return to normal life. Numerous analysts caution that a quick reopening is unlikely given the country's poor vaccine coverage amongst the elderly and lack of natural immunity. Only 40% of Chinese over 80 have received a third dose of vaccine, according to the National Health Commission, far fewer than in other countries. Beijing last week launched plans to vaccinate millions of Chinese in their 70s and 80s, taking aim at a major stumbling block to dropping contaminated measures. China on Tuesday reported 28,062 new COVID-19 infections for the previous day, down from 30,014 cases a day earlier. Moving to Africa, Mongolian protesters stormed palace. Several people have defied freezing temperatures in Mongolia's capital to protest against alleged corruption in the country's coal industry and soaring inflation, with some later attempting to stop Government House. Protesters, many of them young people, rallied in Ulaanbaatar's central Sukhbaatar Square in 21 degrees Celsius temperatures on Monday, seeking justice against corrupt officials and calling for the country's parliament to be sacked. Protesters are frustrated with country's poor economy, with inflation spiraling to 15.2% in the wake of Russia's invasion of Ukraine and closed borders affecting trade with neighboring China. People are suffering incredibly economically. Jana Zilkova, country director for the aid group Caritas Czech Republic in Lubanta, said according to reports. Whistleblower claims that a group of legislators with ties to the local industry had stolen billions of dollars, have added to the discontent. The police tried to break up the demonstration at 9 p.m. local time, but some protesters tried to force their way into the government building, knocking down barriers and breaking windows, according to reports. Police intervened and most protesters had left the square a couple of hours later. Vigil in Democratic Republic of Congo as government increases death toll from violence. Congo's government dramatically added the death toll from a massacre last week they blamed on M23 rebels, saying Monday that 270 people had been killed in an attack that broke a fragile ceasefire agreement. M23's chairman challenged the figure and accused Congo's government of creating a diversion from other atrocities in the region that he says have been committed by government soldiers and their allies. Government spokesman Patrick Muyaya said Monday that the government was opening an official inquiry into what happened in Kishishe, a village situated about 70 kilometers 43 miles from the regional capital of Goma. He said the country's justice minister went to The Hague in the Netherlands and discussed the matter to the prosecutor of the International Criminal Court so that he can investigate the massacres in Kishishe, Muyaya added. In Goma, members of social movements and residents of the city assembled in a vigil to remember the victims of the conflict, carrying banners reading "Kinshishe is not a butchery," also demanded attention of the international community to put an end to the conflict between the M23 rebels group, Rwanda and Congo that has killed dozens and displaced tens of thousands. The Congolese government originally accused the M23 rebels and Rwanda Defense Forces of killing 50 people in Kinshishe. Rwanda's government has continually denied backing the M23 rebels. There was no instant corroboration of that government figure or the newest toll of at least 270 dead due to insecurity in the area, but Muyaya said the information had come from local civil society groups. However, M23 chairman Bertrand Bisimwa said the death toll had been exaggerated by a tribal militia leader and that only 8 people had been killed by stray bullets during the clashes last Tuesday in Kinshishe. Last month at a summit in Angola, the leaders attending it had warned that if M23 did not respect the ceasefire and surrender control of the towns it held in East African Regional Force, will make them do so. A contingent of over 900 Kenyan soldiers already has been deployed to Eastern Congo as part of the regional force agreed to in June, and South Sudan had said it is sending 750 personnel too. The force will eventually include 2 battalions from Uganda and 2 from Burundi as well. Libya seeks global oil players to resume operations. On Monday, Libya's government of national unity announced that it has lifted a force majeure on oil and gas exploration. In a statement, the government urged international oil companies that have contracts with Libya's National Oil Corporation to recommence operations in the country. The statement expressed the government's readiness to provide the needed support in this regard and to create a safe working environment. The decision to lift the force majeure was taken after an analysis of the security situation in Libya. It added that the country will continue the flow of oil, which is the country's major natural resource, to global markets. National Oil Corporation declared a force majeure for oil and gas exploration activities in November 24th due to the security situation in the country. Libya was exempted from a decision by the Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries plus non-OPEC producer countries led by Russia, or OPEC plus, to reduce daily oil production by 2 million barrels as of November. And lastly, on global news, West African Monetary Union to grow 5.7% in 2022. The growth rate within the countries of the West African Economic and Monetary Union, WEMO, amounted to 5.7% in 2022, down 0.4% compared to 2021, announced Monday the leaders of this organization meeting in Abidjan. The 8 member countries of the UEMOA, Senegal, Guinea-Bissau, Ivory Coast, Togo, Benin, Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso have not been spared by the deep crisis that affects the whole world, in particular the consequences of the war in Ukraine, at the same time as our economies were recovering from the shock of the crisis related to COVID, said Ivorian President Alassane Ouattara. In addition to the growth rate, which has slowed from 6.1% in 2021 to 5.7% in 2022, inflation within the union has risen from 3.6% to 7.5% in 2022, Mr. Ouattara said, adding that its member countries had nevertheless shown resilience. Noting that the security situation was worrying because of the rising number of terrorist attacks in numerous UEMOA countries, in particular Burkina Faso and Mali, he pointed out that some of the expenditure that should have been allocated to education and health had been allocated to defense and security. The Abidjan summit was held the day after Abuja summit of the 15 member countries of ECOWAS, to which the UEMOA belong, which decided to create a regional force to intervene not only against jihadism, but also in the event of a coup d'etat, as the region has experienced many over the past 2 years. Several West African countries are suffering from the spread of jihadism from northern Mali to central Mali, Burkina Faso and Niger, and southwards to the Gulf of Guinea. The national armies are largely powerless and cooperate with external actors, the United Nations, France and Russia. Insecurity is a key factor in the military coups that have shaken the region since 2020 in Mali, Burkina Faso, and for so other reasons, Guinea. ECOWAS leaders have decided to recalibrate our security architecture, Omar Torre, chairman of the ECOWAS Commission, said in Abuja. They are determined to establish a regional force that will intervene when needed, whether it is for security, terrorism, or restoring constitutional order in member states, he said. Stay with me for more stories on Zuma Nigeria. Don't go anywhere. We'll be back. Welcome back. It's Zuma Nigeria. 2023 elections, army must remain neutral, says Buhari. In view of the 2023 general elections, President Muhammadu Buhari has directed the Nigerian armed forces to remain apolitical and continue to operate within the framework of the Constitution to guarantee the successful conduct of the elections. President Buhari gave the directive on Sokoto on Monday while declaring open the Chief of Army Staff's Annual Conference 2022. He also urged the army to continue to advance their human rights obligations during operations in line with global best practices. The president pledged that the modernization drive of the Nigerian armed forces will be strongly sustained, including the fast track of the activation of the Nigerian Army Aviation. On human rights, he described improved obligations by security agencies on this issue as the major pathway for winning the hearts and the minds of the people. On the 2023 polls, President Buhari said it is imperative that the army and the armed forces in general assist the civil authority by providing a peaceful environment to enable its successful conduct. He expressed delight that the Chief of Army Staff has already issued a review rules of engagement and code of conduct to guide personnel during the general elections. On the theme of the conference, building a professional Nigerian army for 21st century security environment, the president challenged the army to focus on consolidating on the achievements made so far and ensure continuity to improve the country's security situation. He also tasked them to evolve enduring strategies that will consolidate their efforts in securing the country. President Buhari commended the Chief of Army Staff, Lieutenant General Farouk Yahaya, and other service chiefs, as well as heads of various security agencies, for their determination and improved synergy in accomplishing his directives. He expressed confidence that the renewed vigor and standard injected in operations, as well as the collective resolve and improved civil-military relations, will engender lasting peace and stability in the country. Citing numerous equipment and facilities provided to boost the capability of the Nigerian armed forces, the president promised that special intervention will be made to fast-track the activation of the Nigerian Army Aviation. Nigeria, Vietnam strengthen relations in digital economy, agriculture, others. Vice President Yemi Osinbajo is on a 3-day official visit to Vietnam, where he is working to deepen Nigeria's long-standing bilateral relations with the Southeast Asian country. Both countries plan to collaborate more, mainly in the areas of digital economy, telecommunications, agriculture, and trade, among others, for the mutual benefit of its citizens. The need for enhanced collaboration between Nigeria and Vietnam was the focus of the bilateral meeting between Vice President Yemi Osinbajo and Madame Vo Thi Anh Duong, his Vietnam counterpart, at the Presidential Palace in Hanoi. This is the first high-level trip from the presidency to Vietnam since 2005, when then-President Olusegun Obasanjo visited. Both Professor Osinbajo and Madame Duong acknowledged the country's great market potential generally and especially in digital economy, telecommunications, agriculture, and trade. On Vietnam's quest to establish relations with the Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS, Professor Osinbajo, National Petroleum Company Limited, NNPCL, on the issue of crude oil theft and pipeline vandalism in the Niger Delta region. The Navy, in a statement signed by its public relations officer, A.O. Ayo Vongans, was reacting to some reports that the NNPC was not revealing the true reasons of crude oil theft in the country, but reeling out exaggerated figures to save its face. The report had claimed that the Chief of Training and Operations, Rear Admiral Solomon Agada, while appearing at the Senate Committee on the Economic and Financial Crimes, stated that the NNPC had intentionally continued to mislead Nigerians on the issue of crude oil theft. But reacting to the development, the Navy said that its representative explained that the challenge is due to the criminal activity ensured by the illegal local refineries in tapping into the export lines. He said that many of the export lines have not been in operation since early this year, resulting in opportunity loss. The statement further clarified that the main terminals have not been able to process crude oil for export since around February and March, and such inability to process as export is reported as stolen oil, since it is practically impossible to steal and move 100,000 barrels per day out of the creeks. The statement said the Navy representative at the Senate hearing repeatedly mentioned that the Navy is not indicting the NNPCL in any way and has been working with the national oil giant to curb the menace of crude oil theft since the 1st April 2022, when Operation Dakatar da Barao, OPDDP, was launched in One, Rivers State, as a mutual effort and synergy between the Navy and NNPCL to address issues of crude oil theft, rampant illegal artisan refineries, and illegal oil bunkering, amongst others criminalities in the creeks. A recap of major stories. Northern Afghanistan roadside explosion kills 7. North Korea orders new artillery firings over South drills. Ukrainians face emergency blackouts after Russian missile raids. China bids farewell to former leader, and Amnesty International Canada targets of China-linked cyber attack. Thank you for watching. Remember, continual effort, not strength or intelligence, is the key to unlocking our potential. I am Lois Duraki. Enjoy the rest of your day.